conversation.
Sawa.
And I know we've had a lot of conversations about my project, and I've really, really enjoyed what you've had to say and different ways you've given me direction. Like
thank you.
whenever I would say something like before I thought, oh, like queer history does not exist in the Swahili context, but you've said no. Actually, there are stories being created today, but also past stories where you can see instances of queerness that are not as obvious, and no one will write these were gay people, or if they write that, it's bad. It's like written as a bad thing.
Yeah.
And like you've kind of just been giving me these little directives in a way to be more open of accepting that Swahili culture is not what is written or really what is told, more like we are.
I think that's the beauty of it. I think not just we forget the power of oral history and the power of oral literature and how these things get passed on, where people say with Skia or I've had. And I think when it comes to just no expert, and I haven't done much reading since we last spoke. I think for me we forget the power of oral literature, and also we have to factor in the environment within which we live in. I think and I don't know if you ever get to read Dragonfly Sea, Yvonne O'War.
I've seen the book. I haven't read it.
Please read it. If you're investigating that Swahili culture, and I want to go to Lamu. I don't have the money, but I want to go to Lamu. It's one of the most beautiful books I have read, and one of my highlights for this year.
Okay, yeah,
definitely.
Into that.
So I think for me the beauty of that was, I think there might be a lot of secrecy, a lot of stuff is left unsaid within Kiswahili culture, or even I would say maybe our African cultures. But if you look, not Swahili culture, but if you look at Swahili culture, and I think, I'm theorizing here, the influence of Islam, maybe sometimes it is best not to say things because they are haram. You look at queerness, ushoga, and people know, these exist, and it exists outside of that realm of Islam, but in culture. Thing about Swahili culture on the coast, and growing up and seeing now, is how it has blended, and I think that is beautiful about being on the coast. Like when we grew up, I don't know if I told you, my grandfather used to live in Mombasa. So my dad is Rabbi, which is from the Kilifi County, part of the Mijikenda sub-tribes. My mommy is Nyasa. Though that heritage is linked back to Malawi, but she's third generation freed slave, from Malawi here. So that's the heritage. Born in Nairobi.
Did you ever live any of your childhood here?
No.
So you have come back?
I have come.
Yeah.
I still consider myself a Nairobi person.
You still consider yourself?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. But it was very interesting on the way here from the airport. I was looking at the environment like, I'm so happy to be back. It feels familiar, and I don't, and for me it's not because my heritage is here. It feels like home. Whatever that may be, and I think home, and this is today, where home is not Swahili culture. Home is not just because this is Kilifi. Home is the sea.
Home is the sea.
And I'm realizing that, I'm actually verbalizing that with you. Home is the sea. Home is the sea where I can walk barefoot. I can wear. I got home. I shed everything. Where's my kikoi? And wear my kikoi and walk around bare-chested. I take within the last 5 minutes. I'm already, at home. Yeah. So for me, I've realized home is the sea. Being able to see the sea and look at it, and look at the ocean, I'm like, Tumefika.
I fully like, and then that's the interesting thing. Like I feel like we've definitely grown up into completely different spaces. Like I grew up by the sea, so for me, when I say home is the sea, it's like I'm harking back to a memory I have.
You know the funny thing is, Arafa, I think I made that connection proper when I went to the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, I picked Bournemouth, which is in the south, in Dorset. One, the university was cheap, it was by the sea. And then now this is now the personal bit, when I struggled with my sexuality and faith, I would go to the sea and pray.
Okay.
Everything was done by the sea, by and large. Breaking down, saying, fuck this shit. And even that realization that just because I'm gay, that doesn't mean I need to take my life. It was pleading to have this thing taken away. It was done by the sea, by and large. I don't know, it's because I'm Piscean. When I got Bell's palsy, I remember just going to the sea and standing there. And deciding, fuck it, I'm not going to tell my family, I'm just going to deal with this myself. Or I'm not going to worry about this, it's going to get better. It was, so I think that was the earliest realization. And then I think you go through your wandering years and everything. And then it was only now when I got diagnosed with cancer and I came to Kilifi, I think that just changed everything for me. Because I started realizing the water was calling. I made decisions on what hospital to go to in India, in Kilifi. I made decisions on, and the other decision I made was to stay in Kenya, and my condition to the universe was, if I stay here, I better be in Africa. I go to the sea. I try and go to the sea a day or two before. And this is where I come back. So I think today, I just felt at home by the sea, just driving, just seeing people. I'm like, this is now familiar, this is it. And this is it in the sense that I'm by the sea again. And I just want to say, which is why I think I've made my peace with Dar es Salaam.
Okay, why?
It's by the sea.
That's why you've made your peace with it.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate that until when I went there last year. It's such a fantastic city.
What was your experience of Dar es Salaam?
It was just big, and it was a big city.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand the charm of it. And I've gone there twice recently. Like, this is a nice place, And there's one time I went during Ramadan, and I was staying at the Serena, and then they had iftar in the evening. Me and my mom died and gone to heaven. And I just thought that, and I love the fact in Dar es Salaam, it's a very multicultural form of Islam, more so than you get here. It's white, it's brown, it's black, it's everything.
It's different variations.
It's very, and then you're walking around just seeing people selling photo.
About Dar es Salaam and myself growing up in that, I'm not saying my family was not very Swahili, but obviously we're immersed in it. I grew up in, not my entire life, but when I was much younger, before I went to boarding school in Kenya, we used to live in an area called Upanga. So if you imagine Dar es Salaam is a set of rings, and this was I learned this while I was studying. architecture, I had to do a report, and I chose to do a report in Dar es Salaam, on like the inner city area of Dar es Salaam. So during my readings, I found out that Dar es Salaam was built on a set of rings, where it was like the inner ring where they had
The Germans.
no, the inner ring where they kind of had all the black Africans, so that was the city center.
Oh, really?
And it was not supposed to be the like kind of commercial center of the city. It was just kind of like where the Africans were allowed to live. And then the next band was the band of Arabs and Indians and Asians specifically, and that was supposed to be a sanitation barrier between the African side and the white European side, which was Oyster Bay and Masaki and Sasani Kidogo, like
Oh, that's why that posh area is so far from.
That's why it's so far away.
Oh,
like
really?
It's literally a whole. They look at each other.
So it's
if they
like
look
this.
at each other, yeah. So there's literally like that entire area from Sasani all the way to Panga, and then I guess higher. I never go to those sides.
Yeah.
But like you get a lot of areas that are fully occupied by Indians or Arabs. So Indians being the wealthier areas, so you find like estates and stuff belonging to Indians, and then like in the poorer areas within those residential areas, you find Arabs. They will be the kind of the poorer people of that area, and it's literally it's now obviously it's easier to rent there, but people don't look at it as a desirable place to live because of conflict and stuff, and like having grown there. So my family was there, was my grandmother, my grandfather, my mom, and my aunts. Because she was, it was like the whole family was living there. But I remember like all our neighbors were like in an apartment block. All the neighbors were Arabs and Indians, and just these really lovely, lively people. Like fully lively. And like I would walk down the streets, and literally all my friends were Indians, all my friends were Arabs. And for me, that was the first idea of what Swahili people were. Like that's what I thought Dar es Salaam was and what I was surrounded by. And then we moved from there to Kujiona, which is kind of still, I don't even know like what class, economic class to call my grandfather, because I really don't remember like how we lived or like what stuff I had. But I remember we moved from an apartment to a house that he built himself, and it was a huge moment because it was finally like moving all of us to his house. But then it was in a much poorer area, and so I would like go to the school around the corner, and I would play, like it was more muddy, the roads weren't built up the way they were in Upanga, more sewage around and stuff, and like we would play outside the way I kind of don't remember doing so in Upanga. And it was just like a strange difference because I went from like being surrounded by Indians and Arabs and being surrounded by mostly Tanzanian people.
Black Tanzanian
people. So yeah, just talking about like how you feel like all these cultures are meshed. For me, it was more like it was interesting getting to experience all these individual cultures within their like bubbles.
Then you saw that in Mombasa, you never had the full buibui. I don't know whether you know that, almost like a handkerchief buibui, it's just a string that women would cover, and then you would still see the outfit. That's the Swahili I grew up in.
The kind of less conservative.
Conservative.
You know, more Swahili, because Swahili is like an amalgamation of cultures at this point.
But it's a mishmash of so many Swahilis, and all of them. I did a piece on the on Mombasa. I'll try and look for it if you're interested. And I realized what Mombasa is so ambiguous. It is everybody. And it's that feeling. It's white, it's brown, it's Kikuyu, it's Luo, it's Digo, it's Rambai. It is everything. Mombasa people have an identity that is uniquely Mombasa. That doing that piece made me realize And this is the kind of place where people, I think also like Dar es Salaam, which is why, maybe because now my love for Kiswahili is growing. And when I go, and anyone who goes to Dar es Salaam comes back speaking more Kiswahili.
Of course.
You come in Nairobi, when you leave Nairobi, what do you leave with? Memories.
Memories of people staring at you when you're trying to talk to them because you've just said too many words. You've said too many words and now they're suspicious.
You know, and it's so, I'm like, what do you, and I know when I go back to Nairobi now, I'm speaking a lot more Kiswahili. I'm a lot more human. I'm greeting everybody. I'm that guy now. Vipi, salama, mko salama. Like everyone, the matatu is looking at you. Okay, I haven't done that, but I'm greeting everybody. And I'm a lot more courteous now. I see people more, and which is what I wanted in my life. To see people and people to see me. Which is why I moved to Kilifi. Because I wanted to see people. I think there is Swahili culture, if you look at the coast, and I like what you said, when you look at the strip, all the way from, I'd say, southern Somalia.
Yeah, definitely.
All the way to Mozambique, northern Mozambique.
All the way to the Comoros Islands in Madagascar.
Kabisa,
it's all
yeah.
It's the same.
It's the
same.
sea. You
I
should
mean,
talk to, you
I'm
should
gonna
talk.
go there and
Yeah,
see it, but I believe that it's all the same.
I think sort of island people are not the same. This is the connector.
The ocean, right?
The ocean.
So you think I could keep going along this coast and it would
We are
be
the
like...
ocean. Because this sounds, oh yeah, I should start owning it. I'm going to say this sounds flatty, but we are children of this. Bahari Lahindi. It is the thing that unites us. And people may have traded for years along that. That is the thing. If you want to worry someone, you should. She did something children. I look at her stuff. Either she wrote an essay or something on children, something about the Dao cultures of East Africa. You know, so she knows there's a connection there, and I'm not surprised Dragonfly Sea was what it was.
I saw the book and it had all these accolades, and I was really surprised that a book about Swahili culture was...
Because it's fantastic, it's fantasy, it's something
which we
like,
need, man. This coast is, even the way people talk, like everything is imbued with a sense of, with the continuation, with a sense of nothing seems finalized. There's a constant movement that's going on, and it feels like we could imbue it with fantasy quite easily.
Kabisa.
You know, like I keep waiting for like Swahili fairy tales to come at me, and like, or Swahili mythology to find me.
Yes, there's no problem in doing that yourself.
Really?
Why not?
So,
Why
I don't know.
Why
Actually,
not? Who says you can't?
So,
Who says you can't?
I don't know the rules of history and archiving.
But you see, the thing is, I picked this up from our last conversation. You sort of have to start unlearning the white rules, right? And learning the white Western academic rules to interact with this space. The rules that you need to learn will be rules that you get from. That's why I want to go to that kaya and learn. Okay, what are the rules here?
What are the rules?
Yeah, and I sort of believe innately. Someone said, "But you're a storyteller. You already have it.
You already have all the tools, but it's like.
So just speak."
But I guess someone needs to give you permission to.
I think for me the fact that I started. I don't mean to blow my own horn, but I started calling myself a storyteller kitambo before it became a word. And I remember when at my time as a journalist, I used to say I'm a custodian of people's stories.
Okay.
I didn't use storytelling. It came up later on, but not, I think it was maybe, but before that I used to tell people I'm a custodian of people's stories, even as a journalist. These guys are giving me their stories. And that was my journalism. I was a storyteller. And if I interviewed you, you're giving me permission to use your words. You're giving me permission to use your experiences. What I go and do out there is me storytelling.
Really, yeah.
Yes. How I choose to express those stories, how you choose, by using the Tao, you're telling a story already. You are a storyteller.
how my art is going to go, and a lot of people are trying to like define it. I myself am one of those people trying to define it. But like, it's interesting how you say it feels like there's a force driving us, and we should just kind of trust in that force and like lean into that force and get rid of the idea that there's a structured way of producing, as opposed to like there's also a spiritual way of producing.
Yeah, and that is so, I mean, just as you're speaking and thinking of your project, this is me, you just feeling the texture, just totally feeling the texture of the wood, and tell me what's your story so I can finish this. What's the story of that dam? That boat. What is the story? Because the story of, it's things like, what is the story of the wood? And I think maybe that's where we get our permission, because we recognize. I think we have to start recognizing. Like, I think every baobab tree here has a story.
Yes.
And I used to lean towards the Marubaini because of, I think, health reasons, like it's going to heal me. But all of a sudden,
You notice the baobab?
I notice all of them. There's the two babs where I cycle. There's one called Babu and BP, and I switch because they're androgynous. You know, and I look at one, if it says Babu, I'm like, Shikamo Babu. If there's one, I feel like BB, and they're daily. And it changes, and then there's some further on, I call the twins, because they're exactly, you don't get two trees that look exactly the same side by side. So I know there's Babu, BB, and then the others I call the fact, every Babu tree here.
Such a beautiful idea. We should name this
everyone, and everyone, because these two, and they're just beautiful. Like you were saying, as queer, Babu trees are like queer people. Everyone's got a story, because they're so unique. You know, they're so unique. Point as contemporary Africans, where we are recognizing, you know, we're putting aside everything that we may have been taught that African culture is bad, and then all of a sudden we're looking at the sea, we're looking at the elements, we're looking at the forest, we're looking at mountains, we're looking at hills for connection. You know, I think that there's power in there.
It's like recognizing that our story has been severed in a way.
100%. That, which is why, and I'm telling you, I don't want to be so fun, but that was going to come out really gross. Which is why, and forgive me if it comes across, which is why you're a storyteller. You're giving yourself that permission, and give yourself that permission to tell the stories, because we can't use, for lack of a better word, white man's rules to tell our stories. We have been given keys to that knowledge. And I think we just need to trust the process where we go with it. And I think if we look at the queer movement, we've gotten the knowledge, okay, so there are these terms, there's this, you know, to understand our queerness. But we start asking other questions, so what does this mean to us? Where are our words? Even if our words were not there, I think we have the liberty to invent those words. And say, if it's using kuchu, and saying, yeah, mini kuchu. You know, I'm saying, but this